Hi there, Ali. Good to see you. So, Boris Johnson, when he last spoke last night, did not appear keen at all to let Mr. Cummings go. Has that changed?
It doesn't look that way. There's been some speculation that Dominic Cummings, when he speaks to the media in about 25 minutes from now at Downing Street, might be minded to resign at that point, a resignation statement from him. But I think it's more likely that we get some kind of explanation from Dominic Cummings, perhaps even an apology of sorts for what happened when he and his wife went into isolation back in March, during the peak, really, of the pandemic here in the UK. Certainly the way that Boris Johnson explained all of this at the press conference he did around this time yesterday left more questions, I think, than answers. And so Dominic Cummings has the chance here to answer some of those questions that are still left hanging. But make no mistake, there is real anger in parts of the UK about what Dominic Cummings did. Yes, he's explained it, we understand, to the Prime Minister in terms of mitigating factors with regards to childcare issues. That hasn't gone down particularly well with millions of parents here in the UK who've also had childcare issues and felt that they have followed the lockdown regulations to the letter, but also in the spirit as well.
And Ali, if the Prime Minister is already coming under pressure for what the opposition is calling his inaction in this case, what would a prolonged stay by Dominic Cummings mean for Boris Johnson, who's already been criticised so far for his handling of the COVID-19 outbreak in the UK?
Yeah, well, look, what Dominic Cummings did during lockdown, the way that it has currently been explained to the UK population, would, I think, be a resignation matter for almost anyone else. And there are certainly cabinet ministers who believe that if they had acted in the way that Dominic Cummings did, that they would have lost their jobs. That gives you a sense of just how important Boris Johnson believes that Dominic Cummings is to him as his key advisor. Now, that is not necessarily a good look for a Prime Minister, to be so beholden, so reliant on one individual, but it does give you a sense of why Boris Johnson is keen to retain these services of Dominic Cummings, and why, therefore, we may get from Dominic Cummings in the next 20 minutes or so an apology or an explanation rather than a resignation. It does speak to the difficulties that Boris Johnson has found himself in, though, throughout this coronavirus crisis. The polling suggests that actually a large section of the public believes that Boris Johnson and his government have done a pretty good job in responding to coronavirus, and that sometimes the debates playing out on social media and in some of the sections of the media, the written press as well, don't necessarily reflect the reality on the ground when it comes to perception of how the government has handled the crisis. But certainly what Boris Johnson didn't want was over a long public holiday weekend here in the UK for everyone to be discussing the behaviour of his closest aide.
Away from the scandal, then, the UK has passed its peak as far as COVID-19 is concerned, but there are still infections and people sadly dying. What's on the diary for the coming days?
Well, Boris Johnson met with his cabinet earlier today, and certainly what he wanted this week to be about was an easing of the lockdown here in the UK, some positivity looking towards the future, some optimism that the peak of the crisis continues to be behind the United Kingdom, and that starting to return to some kind of normality might be possible. We heard in his press conference yesterday that he wanted to press ahead with schools reopening on a phased basis from June the 1st, that he believes that the UK is in a good position to do that now, with the case numbers declining and the fatalities declining as well. That idea that he talked about in terms of schools reopening and pressing ahead with it in the press conference 24 hours ago got completely ignored, really, because of the furore around Dominic Cummings. So Boris Johnson wants this week to start to move ahead from the Dominic Cummings story, move away from it and get back to the issues regarding COVID-19 and moving on from the pandemic. But that will very, very much depend on what Dominic Cummings says in the next 20 minutes or so, and exactly how it's received.
Ollie Barrett, will certainly come back to you once there is movement from that announcement that we're expecting sometime later into the evening. That's our ENCA correspondent in the UK, Ollie Barrett.